Okay, this lesson starts out chapter 3. Chapter 3 is all about rates and percents. So basically, we're going to be talking a whole lot about how to convert from a fraction to a decimal to a percent, or to how to go from a percent to a fraction, or a percent to a decimal, and just how all those three relate. So this lesson is called Give Me a Ballpark Figure of the Cost, and it's about estimating, calculating, with percents and rates. Some of this you may have seen before, so it should be easy for you, and then other parts of it may be new to you, and you may take a little extra work. So our learning goals here are, in this lesson, you will estimate and calculate using, estimate and calculate values using rates, and you'll estimate and calculate the values of percents. Have you ever wondered why discounts and coupons are always a multiple of 5 or 10%? Think about it. When was the last time you saw a discount of 17% off shoes? Or when was the last time you saw 38% off a flat screen television? There are a few reasons for discounts that are multiples of 5 or 10%. One is that it's easier for customers to estimate the discount of an item that is 25% off the cost than it is than an item that is 41%. Can you think of other reasons why multiples of 5 and 10% discounts are the most common discounts? So think about that for a second. If you come up with anything, go ahead and write that down. And as we go through this lesson, you'll probably be able to answer that question toward the end when we're finished. So problem 1 is all about ordering floor. So we have this person that knows a flooring company that sells laminate, hardwood, and ceramic tile. So for each type of flooring, there's a certain amount of waste material. The table shows the amount of waste for each type of flooring. So for our laminate flooring, we have 1/10 of it is waste. The hardwood floor, we have 20% of it is waste. And the ceramic tile is 25% waste. So that means, like, when they go and they look at your floor, they can't just cut it out to meet your floor's needs. Basically, it's going to be in the shape of a large rectangle that they're going to cut out around your furniture and things like that and your wall space, and then whatever they cut out, whatever's left over is that excess or that waste that they have to get rid of. But you can't just order flooring that matches perfectly. So because you have to buy things in rectangles or square shapes, you're actually paying for that extra waste that comes with it. So this means that when an order is placed, the amount of estimated waste material must be added to the order. For example, if an order is placed for 200 square feet of laminate, then 1/10 more laminate must be ordered to make sure that there's enough flooring to complete the job. So say you've estimated it's going to take 200 square feet of laminate. You want to go ahead and add on 1/10 of that just to make sure you have plenty because of the excess waste that you're going to have to get rid of. So for the first one, we are looking at how much laminate flooring would be needed for a room of 120 square feet. Well, 120 square feet. We're looking at laminate right now. So here's our laminate, and it calls for 1/10 of waste. So 1/10 of our 120 square feet is going to be waste that we need to add on to our 120 for a total. So basically, we need to take our 1/10 and we need to create a decimal. So 1/10 is 0.1 as a decimal. Now what we would do is we would take our 120, we could multiply by 0.1, and that's going to give us 12. So our extra waste would be 12 square feet. So then we have to look back, well, how much do we need total? If we have 12 square feet that are waste and we have 120 square feet that we are estimating that we would need, then we would have 132 square feet total. So we have 120 plus 12. This is our waste that we just calculated because it's 10% of 120. And that's going to give us our total of 132 square feet. Okay, Let's go ahead and look at 200 square feet. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're using the same portion of waste, which is that 1/10. We just calculated that right here. So we would take our 200, we would multiply by 1/10 because we're trying to get a tenth of what 200 is to add back on to 200 to see what our total is. So 1/10 of 200 is 20. Okay, so from there, we're going to take what our original is, what our waste is, and we're going to add those together. So we have 200 plus 20, which gives me a total of 220 square feet. Again, this is what we're thinking is going to do the job. That may be like the square footage of the house, the floor in the house. We need to make sure we have plenty, so that waste, the excess, which is a tenth of 200, we're going to add those two numbers together to get our total of 220 square feet. The last one, we're doing exactly the same thing. So we have 240. We're going to multiply by that 1/10, which equals 24. Okay, so then we're going to do our 240, which is what we think the floor would need. We have the excess that we need to add on to that to make sure we have enough space, not enough space, but enough floor to cover all of the space. That's going to give us 264 square feet total. Next, we're moving on, and instead of, well, first of all, they wanted to explain some things, or we need to explain how we determined each answer. So basically what we did is we calculated 1/10 of the given measurement. So we knew, we just took whatever we thought would cover the floor, we took a tenth of that and then added it back on, and that's what your answer should say. So go ahead and write that down. Remember that to determine a percent of a number, you can just multiply just as you would to calculate a fraction of a number. So to determine 25% of 140, you can write the percent as a fraction or decimal and multiply. So in this case, instead of using 1/10, I just used the decimal form, which is 0.1. But you can do either or. You could have taken 200 and multiplied by 1/10 as a fraction to get the same number. It would give you the same exact answer. I just think it's easier to put the decimal into a calculator rather than a fraction. So moving on, the next piece asks us about hardwood flooring. So I'm going to go back to the problem 1, and let's look at, for hardwood flooring, hardwood floor is 20% waste. So again, we're going to take what they give us as a given measurement for how much they think they need to cover the space on the floor, and then we have to add that 20% extra on there to make sure we have enough, and then we'll have that extra excess waste. So 20%, you can multiply by 20%, or again, I think it's much easier to think about it in terms of a decimal. So I could take my 20% and convert it to 0.2, and then I'm going to use that for each one of these. So I would take 100, multiply by 20%, or 0.2, and that is going to give me 20. So this is what I start with. This is going to be my excess waste, and then I'm going to take the two and add them up to get my total. So this one is going to be 120 square feet total. I want you to do B, C, and D, and then come back and check your answer. So here are the answers for those three. Basically, to determine each answer, you're taking 20% of the given measurement, and then you're going to add that 20% back onto the original given measurement to get the total. So here I took 180, multiplied it by 0.2. That would give me 36. I had 180 and 36 to get 216 total. Again, here we have 90 times 0.2, which gives me 18, and then I add 90 and 18 to get a total of 180. The next problem is exactly the same. This time it's asking about ceramic tile. So I want you to go back, figure out, I can do this part with you. We're going to figure out, this one now is 25%. So I want you to figure out 25% of the given number of square feet, and then add that back on to figure out how much total ceramic tile you would need to do a job for the size rooms that they give you. Do that, come back and check yourself. So there are your answers. I'm hoping you're getting these correct. Moving on. Okay, problem 2 is about make sure to tip your waitress and waitresses. Waitresses and waiters. So most restaurant patrons add a tip to the final bill to show their appreciation for their wait staff. Usually a patron will determine 15 or 20% of the bill and then add that to the amount to the total. Many times patrons will just round off the tip to the nearest dollar. For patrons tipping 20%, determine the amount of a tip is easier. 20% is 1/5, so to determine the tip, patrons only need to divide the rounded bill by 5. For example, if the bill is $38.95, you would round to 40, then divide by 5. The 20% tip should be about $8. So on these problems, we're going to estimate what we think the total bill should be to figure out. Actually, it just asked for the tips. We're going to estimate 20% tip for each of the bills shown. So this one, I would go ahead and round that to 90. And then from 90, we are going to divide by 5. So 90 divided by 5 is 18. Or you could simply say 90 times 20% equals 18. Either way you look at it, this tip should be about $18. So again, to recap, 20% is equal to 0.2, or 20% is also equal to 1/5. All of those are equivalent. So 20% equals 0.2, which equals 1/5. All three of those are equivalent. So you can use any one of those to calculate this total tip. So we're taking our 89.95 or 89.45, we're going to multiply, we're going to round up to 90 because it's about 90. We're going to take that and multiply by 0.2, or we're going to divide by 5 because it's 1/5. Or you could also have taken 90 and multiplied by 1/5. That would also give you $18 as your tip. So I want you to choose the method that works best for you, and you're going to calculate B and C, and then you're going to come back and check yourself. Go ahead. These are the 3 different ways. On this one, I divided by 5. This one, I multiplied by 1/5. And this one, I multiplied by the decimal form of 20%, which is 0.2. All 3 of those yield an answer of $25. So the tip would be $25. Again, you don't have to do each one of these methods. These are just showing you 3 different methods you could use to come up with the correct answer. Same thing here. I estimated this bill about $12. So I did 12 times 1/5. I did 12 times 0.2, and I did 12 divided by 5. They all give me an answer of $2.40. So the tip in this case should be $2.40. So a 15% tip can be estimated by first estimating 10% of the bill. Then a patron would determine half of the 10% of the bill, which would be 5%. Finally, a patron would add the 2% values together to calculate 15% of the bill. For example, if you had a bill that was $23.53, first divide by 10 to get $2.30. Then you can determine half of that amount, or $1.15. So I just took half of 230 to get $1.15. And then finally, you would add the two tip amounts together to get $3.45, which is approximately $3.50. So let's go ahead and estimate these, estimate a 15% tip. So in this case, I'm going to take my 89.45 and I'm going to make that approximately $90. So approximately $90 what we're working with. So I want to first take my $90 and figure out what 10% would be. So again, I can either divide by 10 or I can multiply by 0.1 or I can multiply by 1/10. Any of those ways. For me, it makes most sense to use the decimal. So that's what I'm going to do. So $90 times 10% would be 9. If you think about this, if I have $90 written out, all you're basically doing is moving the decimal point one place to the left to take 10% of the number. So using this, thinking about this, we have $9. That would be 10%. We want 15%. It says a 15% tip. So what simply I can do is take, well, I know the 10% is $9. So 5% would be $4.50 because it's half of $9. All I did was I figured out what 10% of 90 was, which is 9. Then I took half of that number, which is 5%, because half of 10% is 5%. I took half of that, and it's $4.50, because that's half of 9. So then I would take 9, and I would add $4.50 to it to get $13.50. So a 15% tip would be $13.50 for this case. So I want you to think about that. I want you to go ahead and try B and C on your own and then come back and check your answers. So this is part B for you. I took 10% of 125, which is $12.50. From there, I took half of this because half of 5% is half of 10%. So half of $12.50 is $6.25. So I added those two together to get the $18.75. And the last problem. Okay, once you feel comfortable with this, you can go ahead and move on to the skills practice that's attached to your work plan. Actually, you don't have 3.1 skill practice, so I can provide that for you in class. Other than that, if you have any questions, you need to come and see me.